Well, it's time now to zoom in on the latest. In our other news, we will, of course, be taking a closer look at the unemployment rate, which decreased by 0.6%, however, still leaving black women out of jobs. South Africa's unemployment rate is now at 33.9% in the second quarter of 2022, down from 34.5% in the first quarter and a record high of 35.3% in the fourth quarter of 2021. Despite this 0.6% decrease, the rate is still far too high. The quarterly labour force survey also found that South African women make up 49% of the unemployed population, with black women being the most affected. The Youth Employment Service is calling for the recognition and consideration of women in decision-making spaces, but mostly generally into the workforce. But how can we achieve this? Chief of Partnerships Officer at Youth Employment Services, Farai Mubaiwa, weighs in and she joins us now for our conversation. Farai, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on our platform.
Morning, Naz, and thank you so much for having me as well. It's really, really important that we can discuss and unpack these stats, especially in Women's Month and as we draw to a close.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's tons of research, Farai, proving really that when more women work, economies tend to grow. We've seen this taking place in Europe, we've seen it taking place in Central Asia, and yet it does seem that in South Africa we're yet to catch on. Why is that? Why are we still struggling to implement this very basic principle?
I think that there are numerous challenges which are serving as the barriers to actually how women can succeed and thrive within the economy. There's an aspect in terms of what are the cultural norms which hold women back from being able to access employment opportunities. There's also still a lot of the stigma which is attached in terms of numerous sectors where women can actually enter and play a part in. Moreover, access to opportunities within the country is incredibly limited. I am very grateful that there are more platforms which have come about, like YES, to actually increase the access, but access to opportunities within the country is overall very, very limited. So unless you have strong networks, unless you are within certain areas and the communities, your access to employment opportunities will be significantly low. One other aspect to highlight, though, is that networks form a huge part in how you can access employment opportunities. And because of our history as a country, because of your policies like the Areas Act, we are still so segregated in terms of who lives where, what networks can they access, what do neighbors around them do, what sort of work do they find themselves in, who are the role models within the communities we come from, and as a result, how do we then access opportunities of employment or of entrepreneurship with ease? So one can really write a thesis in terms of what are the barriers women face in South Africa to accessing opportunities for employment, especially Black women. And I think what we definitely have to change and to accelerate as a country is that with Black women, we are consistently affected by the unemployment crisis. And yet that's not at all in relation to actually how many of us are in our economically active population group. So we have to change that through some innovative ways, through policy changes, through programs like YES, which look at how do we create employment opportunities for young women across the board, including in your sectors which have not been historically seen for young women. And the more we can accelerate such initiatives, the greater change we'll see. But you're absolutely right that where we've seen countries which have high levels of women who are employed, that's led directly to economic growth.
Talking about those difficult sectors that historically haven't always, achieved great access for women, it was very interesting to note, Farai, that 0.6% decrease, those gains that we made in terms of employment in the last quarter were in several sectors, in community and social services, in trade, finance, as well as construction centres. Those last three, quite notably, historically, very difficult and very challenging for women to access. Finance and construction, etc., are generally very male-driven areas. So what are they doing right, I suppose, in terms of targeting women and trying to get them on board? Or what else could we be doing to get greater female participation in those sectors?
So two things, right? One is that it's been really fantastic to actually notice which of the sectors have increased the number of employment opportunities within this last quarter. And the sectors which they actually align with work that YES has done with presidency, where we've mapped up what are high growth industries within the country, what is the job potential of each of these industries, and how do we then accelerate employment opportunity within these industries? What are some policy levers we can look at, move and shift? What are some barriers and how do we remove those barriers? So that's the first part, that it's really significant to actually see how many opportunities have been unlocked in the sectors that we have strategically focused on. And it's been a mass collaborative effort between us as YES, presidency, the private sector, other civil society organizations. And the more we can work together in South Africa to address crises, the more we will find ourselves without these crises. The second point is that it is definitely so significant that we have seen job growth in sectors like construction. And I think what companies are doing right is two things. One is signing up with YES, where we definitely encourage you as you sign up to look at how you give more young women an opportunity. And the second is changing the face of that industry so that you can increase accessibility. And I want to just hone in on the YES part. YES has been in existence now for just over 3.5 years. In that time, we have created over 82,000 jobs for unemployed youth from the involvement of over 2,200 corporates. Of the YES youth, 58% of them are young women. And that's been something very deliberate and intentional on our part, because we understand that from an economic perspective, the more young women are employed, the more they have got income that they're earning in their household, the more not only their own household will be impacted, but the community as well. Really interesting as well about our YES stats is that 90% of our YES youth live in grant recipient households. So as a result, we've said, how do we intentionally shift that? How do we shift that reality? And we've been very specific in terms of how can we put youth, especially young women, into these traditionally male sectors. And so we've got young women who are working as drone pilots. In fact, our drones program has about 80% women who all go on to find permanent employment because of how key drones are within the economy. We've got young women as well who are working in manufacturing cell phones, manufacturing your sanitary pads, and then being able to distribute those within the community. We've got young women who are doing ICT and coding, which is absolutely key. So the more young women we can intentionally place into these roles to prove that girls can do anything, girls are so capable, the more we can change societal views, the more we can change these narratives that women are only limited to jobs in the social and care economy, for example. And the better we can do that and see that, what we're then seeing is actually increased employment rates amongst those women because they're in such high growth sectors which need longevity, and those women are then permanently employed within those roles. And as a result of that, other young women from the communities they come from also see examples of what does a young woman who looks like me do? And if she's a drone pilot, then I too am so capable. So there's so many different ways in which companies can be involved, in which we as YES are being involved as well. We're really working with many partners and corporates to say, let's massify employment opportunities intentionally, and let's ensure that they've got sustainability, especially for young women.
So key. But thank you so much, Farai, for joining us this morning. That's the Chief Partnerships Officer at Youth Employment Services, Farai Mubaiwa, talking to us there about how we can get greater participation for women in our economy. Well,